Spirituality is dead. Star Wars spirituality, that is. It was very strong in the original trilogy, went downhill a little bit in the prequels, and then tanked in the sequels. I'm looking for the man who killed the Force. What makes a great story? There are probably as many answers to this question as there are great stories. The complexity that goes into storytelling in different mediums, reaching different audiences, makes answering this question nearly impossible. If you ask this question about a specific story, the answers you will get will be difficult to parse through. Lots of people appreciate Star Wars for a variety of different reasons. You could watch endless amounts of content on YouTube, all with different takes on what makes this franchise great. The sights, the sounds, the ways that we relate to the characters, and a multitude of other factors will connect us to the franchise in different ways. Star Wars is unique among its peers though. Now, admittedly, as a Star Wars fan, I am a bit biased. However, Star Wars is ubiquitous. Calling yourself a Star Wars fan makes you about as unique as a car enthusiast at a NASCAR rally. What got us to where we are today? Was it just good marketing? I don't think that's sufficiently explanatory. Some would suggest that Star Wars was doing things that nobody else was doing at the time. Much like the Beatles, when we look back at Star Wars, we can't see the revolutionary things it did nearly as well because we're living in its wake. Everything that came out afterward was touched by this cultural landmark. It was a revolution in filmmaking. And you know, that's probably true. I mean, I'm not a film historian, so I can't say that with any authority, but I am going to yes and that explanation. If you watch any reactions to the original Star Wars movie, it's kind of wild.
Air was sucked out of the place, and then when the white Star Destroyer came overhead, I teared up.
People talked about this movie as if it was a life-changing experience.
But I never thought I would have a day's experience like the day I've had today in seeing this film.
This movie that during production no one believed in somehow touched people in a way that seems disproportionate.
And the prestige of being able to say you've seen Star Wars is something akin to royalty, really.
They're talking crazy. They're talking like fanatics. It almost sounds like they had a religious experience. Maybe that's because they did. Many people talk about George Lucas as if he just got really lucky. He had nothing of quality to bring to the table, and it just so happened that he surrounded himself with geniuses who carried his strange ideas into eventual billions of dollars. Here's a revolutionary idea. Nobody else could have made Star Wars.
My goodness, what an idea.
Okay, that's sort of obvious, right? But I think nobody else could have made anything else like it. This anthropology student turned filmmaker used his experience brilliantly. George was utterly concerned with the stories of our past. Those legends that were handed down to us for generations. He was able to capture the power in those stories due to his unique background in a way that no one else could. These supposedly silly movies have metaphysical explorations that feel impactful to people who don't even live in that universe. The divide between George Lucas and other filmmakers becomes very obvious when you look at every piece of Star Wars content that has come out since his absence. Try as they might, no one has been able to recapture the magic. Again and again, we're promised that the next project will go back to formula, but that will never happen. The spiritual aspect of Star Wars isn't just window dressing for Star Wars, it's the fuel. And very few people understand this, like George Lucas.
When the film came out, almost every single religion took Star Wars and used it as an example.
So, with that being said, I'd like to take you on a little journey. Let's take a look at the beauty of the original Star Wars movies to see why no one can replicate them.
All women are queens!
So, I need you to understand something here. George wasn't just throwing vaguely spiritual ideas into his movies. He knew what he was talking about. He didn't just read The Hero with a Thousand Faces and base Star Wars on the monomyth. He learned directly under Joseph Campbell. Campbell had a very de-spiritualized spirituality with a psychologized view of myths. He was very much influenced by the early psychoanalysts, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. George re-spiritualized the de-spiritualized spirituality. That, I think, is the power of Star Wars. It takes these myths, these stories we've lost to time, and reinvigorates them. It takes the ideas that have been handed down to us for generations and puts them into a fresh new context. For the individual, a dream helps you process and interpret the world around you. The psychoanalysts argued that myths are the dreams of society. Star Wars carries that power. It's the power of dream and myth displayed before our eyes. It's not just a dumb space movie. it's incredibly thoughtful. George read 50 different books on world religions before he wrote these movies. As we explore the original trilogy's themes, I hope that the thoughtfulness behind them becomes as obvious to you as it is to me. The religious themes take front and center as they flesh out the world and make it feel alive. From the very start of the first movie, we get a glimpse of this sort of spiritual essence. As we begin the film in the Tantive 4, all of the visuals are foreign and yet almost recognizable. Whether intentionally or not, the movie conveys the feeling that you're on holy grounds from the very beginning. It gives a similar impression to walking into a place of worship. It's clear that this place is set apart, that you're entering a space that's different from the outside world. This is the real strength of George Lucas's style. Everything feels strange and foreign. The dialogue is somewhat stilted, and his vision is entirely unique.
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Every moment of these movies give the impression that you're in a different world. The cast and crew of these movies were bewildered by the dialogue, and that's what made it work.
I thought, who talks like this, George? I doubt if the actual security there is any greater than it was on Aquilai or Soest, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
Famously, the actors revised some of the dialogue, and the blend of stilted and strange line delivery with some of the reworks from the crew makes for a convincing otherworldly experience. Star Wars gives off the impression of being an old VHS tape that you found in your parents' basement that secretly slaps, even though it's literally the movie that invented blockbusters. Now that we've established the ways that spirituality is the driving force of this movie, let's explain how it actually turns out. These movies play out like a religious text if you're paying attention. There's all sorts of spiritual wisdom integrated into the story. So, in order to maximize your appreciation for the theological implications of these movies, I want to lay out a sort of systematic theology of Star Wars. I'm going to play some quotes from the Jedi and hopefully explain what's going on under the hood philosophically. As we explore different quotations that are in these movies, we will see that these quotes don't just further the plot. They're an explanation of religious philosophy that is compelling, coherent, and cogent. Obi-Wan almost passingly introduces us to the Force the first time around.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
I bet Luke wasn't expecting to learn a lesson on metaphysics today. Obi-Wan is pretty casual about dropping this knowledge about how life, the universe, and existence work. This is important though. It's the fundamental framework of the world that the movies will continue to expand and build on. Now that the story has been told in such a non-linear fashion, it's easy to forget that this was our first exposure to the Force, and in spite of its brevity, it opens us to the world's ideas quite effectively. When Luke trains for the first time, he uses his lightsaber to block shots from a droid. Obi-Wan tells him that a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him. Luke deduces that it controls your actions, and Obi-Wan tells him that it also obeys your commands. This subtly conveys the content of the Jedi religion. They're subject to the will of the Force, and yet harness it for their own purposes. In a sense, that which controls your destiny and subjugates your free will is also what enables it. You're both in submission to the Force that controls the universe and can also experience it for yourself and call upon it. These are almost contradictory, and yet they lie in harmony with one another. Luke struggles to block the laser bolts, but Obi-Wan covers his vision and tells him to act on instinct. This training exercise forces Luke to stop depending on what he knows and take a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. When Luke stops depending on his senses, he's able to block the bolts. In his blindness, he's finally able to see. He makes a transcendent breakthrough and crosses the threshold from ignorance into knowledge. Yoda makes it clear that the power in the Force is determined by more than physical capability.
Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you?
The power within us is not determined by our physical strength. Without the assistance of the Force, a regular person could take Yoda out unarmed pretty easily.
Where you should not. For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is.
Remember back to the first thing Obi-Wan said.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power.
Yoda continues his lessons on metaphysics.
Life creates it, makes it grow.
The Force is somewhat of a confusing combination of ideas. It's simultaneously that which gives life, and yet it's created by life. The power Luke is trying to access is native to life itself. It's that which he's experienced his whole life, and yet he must trust it in order to access its power.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
This is quite similar to what Obi-Wan says in episode 4.
Surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
It almost establishes a sort of liturgy. This is the basic fact of what the Force is, but it serves here as a reminder. This is who you are, and not just you, but me and everyone else. Not only is it everyone, but it's also everything.
Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you.
Whether you operate from a materialist or supernatural mindset, there's something really compelling about this scene. Your consciousness doesn't feel meaningless. The Force is a fictional sort of metaphysics. It's an abstraction of religion, but it's not an existent religion. This scene, the way Yoda explains it, makes it feel real. It gives me butterflies every time I see it. That feeling of connection to something greater than yourself is manifested here. How many movies have a moment as powerful as this? It's the ultimate spiritual moment in a movie. It elevates your consciousness. You aren't merely a collection of chemicals. It doesn't feel like that, and you don't live like that. Connect to the world as it is. Feel that. Live it out. It's powerful. Luke has some of the greatest teachers in the world, but he needs to overcome a terrible learner's mindset. With Yoda, Luke's X-Wing sinks and he complains that he'll never be able to get it out. Yoda retorts,
Always with you what cannot be done.
It sounds like Luke is being realistic, but this is a refusal to take responsibility. He has a task in front of him, but he's busier questioning the possibility of its execution than actually doing what he's supposed to. He's not accepting his fate or his destiny. He's skirting responsibility for fate. Here, Yoda criticizes him for his pessimistic attitude. He's decided what's possible before even attempting to go through with it. Luke objects that moving stones is different, but Yoda proclaims that it's no different.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
This is the learner's mindset that's necessary for connection with the spiritual. To trust in a power greater than yourself, you must assume that you don't understand it. You must accept the wisdom of others as you seek mastery. Your assumptions about how the world works cloud your judgment. Luke says he'll try, and Yoda criticizes this with one of the most quoted lines in the film.
Do or do not. There is no try.
In the materialist mindset, this is kind of a dumb thing to say. Of course you can try. Sometimes your abilities are limited and all you can do is try. This is Luke's responsibility though. Luke is dealing with a power greater than himself, but he limits that power to himself. When he tries to lift the ship, he fails because he's weighed down by his assumptions of what is possible. It's here that Yoda beautifully explains how the Force works. In this triumphant moment, Luke takes this as a defeat.
You want the impossible.
He's given the ultimate wisdom. Yoda just told him the secret to life in the world, and all he hears is noise because he thinks he can't get what he wants. Already, Yoda has revealed himself as a Jedi Master to Luke, but Luke still doesn't know who he's with. Yoda lifts the ship out of the water, assisted by the power of John Williams' music. This scene has stuck in the cultural memory because it makes what are simple tricks of filmmaking into something powerful. It's a work of fiction, but it explores spiritual philosophy in a way that feels so real. We're 11 movies in. We know what the Force can do now, but if you sit with this scene and watch it on its own terms, it's powerful.
I don't believe it.
The truth is right in front of Luke. He assumed what was possible, and that limited him. Now that incontrovertible evidence of the power of the Force is in front of him, he doubts his own eyes. His presuppositions are so strong that he would rather question what he sees than what he believes. He denies the Force that gives him life.
That is why you fail.
Here, Yoda calls out the tension present in Luke's mind. Luke was initially very willing to open up to the Force. When Han Solo expressed skepticism, Luke called it out.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
When the rubber meets the road, though, Luke is closer to Han's skepticism than to the faith of Obi-Wan or Yoda. The nature of power is explored through the differences in the Jedi and Sith philosophy. What does it mean to be powerful? To what end are you harnessing your power? Why do you pursue it? These are the questions that separate the Jedi and the Sith. One of the most universal themes in religion is grasping with death, and the religion of the Jedi deals with this as well. Both Jedi who die in these movies confront death openly without fear. They accept this and look forward to being reunited with the Force. Even as Luke has become a Jedi Knight, he still doesn't understand this in the way Yoda does. When Yoda announces his death, Luke denies it.
Master Yoda, you can't die.
Strong am I with the Force, but not that strong.
There's no level of power that can save you from death. It's the nature of life.
Twilight is upon me, and soon night must fall. That is the way of things, the way of the Force.
It's normal to fear death. It's virtuous to overcome that fear. Why fear what belongs to every man? The Jedi understand that death leads to something greater, to become one with the Force. We first see this in Obi-Wan's duel with Darth Vader. Vader taunts Obi-Wan, telling him that his powers are weak, but Obi-Wan flips the script.
You can't win, Darth. If you you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Vader has a limited scope of what power can be. By his own measure, he's as powerful as anyone could be. Obi-Wan is essentially confronting him here, saying, "You don't even know what power is." One could criticize this scene and question what it means to become powerful. Obi-Wan doesn't do anything that indicates his power after his death besides show up as a ghost.
It's like my man Tupac says, no one man should have all that power.
I think this misses the point though. As we'll see later, to conform the world to your idea of how it should be is the dark side's understanding of power. To conform your own will to that of the universe is the Jedi's idea of power.
When I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
Obi-Wan essentially disregards the basis of Vader's power. Vader considers the dark side to be his strength, but Obi-Wan doesn't consider it to be strength at all.
Is the dark side stronger?
No, but busier, more seductive.
This is the lie that Vader has bought into. The dark side must be stronger. His embrace of aggression has made him stronger. And yet, Obi-Wan scorned Vader's power. The dark side promises to give you power. The light side allows you to be in tune with the universe. The light side is more powerful, but in order to embrace it, you must sacrifice your desires and let a power greater than yourself control your destiny. This demonstrates the dichotomy between the Jedi and Sith view of the dark side. The dark side is like a cash advance on power. The Sith believe that they have unique access to the power that comes from the dark side. Vader repeatedly insists that
You don't know the power of the dark side.
The deception here makes a lot of logical sense. If one way is faster but not truly more powerful, then it would seem as if it were more powerful. When the Sith get the advance on their power, they assume that this is what true power is. Yet the Jedi have true power. Not even death can stop them. This all sounds good in theory, but you also need to understand the difference between light and dark if you are to choose one. Luke asks this very question.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
You will know when you are calm, at peace.
Embrace the world as it is. See your place in it. When you understand this, you will be able to know right from wrong. This doesn't mean that you will need to be inactive. Instead, you need to see the good and pursue it without concern for how you think the world should be. Yoda describes how one can be drawn to the dark side.
Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they.
These are the three spiritual weaknesses. All of these blind us to what is good. Anger is a rejection of fate. You feel injustice as the world doesn't live up to your expectations. Fear rejects fate in a different way. It hides from it. Aggression is to take control of your destiny, but not in a way that's guided by fate. Rather, you take the world and try to conform it to your own image. It doesn't matter who you hurt in the process because you feel as though you have the right to take what isn't yours.
Easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight.
This is the temptation of the dark side. It's easy to get caught up in. You can use it as your ally for temporary gain while ignoring the consequences of your action. You sacrifice your own soul to pursue victory in combat. If you set out to fight for what is good, you may find that it's easier to accomplish good ends through evil means. The road to the dark side is paved with good intentions. Even at the low point of the entire original trilogy, Darth Vader tries to convince Luke that he wants to use the dark side for good.
With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
Vader wants the conflict to end. Perhaps he would even be willing to side with Luke and somehow help the rebellion. There would be a price to accepting this offer, though. Vader may claim some level of altruism, but if his methods are evil, then you can be certain that the results will also be evil. This conflict creates an interesting conundrum for Luke. You would think that it would be right for him to strike down the Emperor and kill him when the opportunity arises. That would end the conflict and help the rebels win. Counterintuitively, this is actually what the Emperor wants him to do.
Take your Jedi weapon. Strike me down with it.
This is a concrete example of the easy path that Yoda warned Luke about. Again, if your end is good, but your means are not, then you will soon find that the end is no longer good.
Give in to your anger. With each passing moment, you make yourself more my servant.
The Emperor throws a serious curveball here by aligning his wishes with a desirable goal for Luke. If this were a video game, this would be Luke's objective: kill the bad guy. Luke's stated goal for being here is not to kill the Emperor, though. It's to redeem his father. Throughout Luke's first duel with Vader, he taunts Luke.
Now, release your anger. Only your hatred can destroy me.
Vader brings together the ideology of the Sith and the temptation that Luke faces. He's goading Luke to take an advance on his power. He claims this is the only way to pursue power.
You can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny.
The dark side is the only tool the Sith believe will help you progress toward your goals. What Darth Vader says here is very interesting though. He says this is Luke's destiny. Obviously, Luke doesn't do this, so how could this be his destiny? This leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Sith philosophy. They view their own will as destiny. Darth Vader talks about this a lot during their duel.
Your destiny lies with me, Skywalker. Obi-Wan knew this to be true.
They falsely assume that their power is unlimited. It contrasts them in a significant way with the Jedi. The Jedi embrace their destiny. They allow it to control their actions. The Force obeys their commands, but they also live in obedience to it. The Sith take the opposite approach. They attempt to take control of their destinies. By doing this, they assume that their own will is destiny. They believe that this is truth.
The Emperor will show you the true nature of the Force. He is your master now.
The Sith attempt to take control of reality and then assume that their will thereby becomes destiny.
You underestimate the power of the dark side. If you will not fight, then you will meet your destiny.
If you face the dark side soberly, then there's no real appeal to it. Oh, look at all this power you can obtain.
They hate on me 'cause I'm doing what they can.
The Sith are so excited to talk about their power. They think of themselves as forces of nature. Look at them though. Is this a desirable destiny? They're maimed old men. Sure, they have plenty of power, but nothing else. They've min-maxed their build into power alone. They've sacrificed their souls just so that they can use their wills to oppress others. When Luke refuses to join them, he's treated as something to be annihilated.
If you will not be turned, you will be destroyed.
That which does not conform to their understanding of reality must be destroyed. They have the self-image of being an unstoppable force, and yet, when they encounter an immovable object, their solution is to erase it from existence. They can't face the reality that they may not truly be unstoppable.
If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will.
Yoda warns Luke here about the danger of the dark side. Luke will soon oppose this point of view, and Yoda will be proven wrong, but the argument has its merits. If the dark side is a slippery slope, perhaps there can be no redemption. To embrace it is to sacrifice your own soul. Once you make that sacrifice, there's no going back. There's a point of no return when your soul becomes so worn down that you can't come back. Everybody seems to think this way. The Jedi and the Sith disagree on very much, but this is a uniting issue for them. Obi-Wan reinforces what Yoda says. When Luke tries to tell Obi-Wan that there's still good in Vader, Obi-Wan shuts him down right away.
He's more machine now than man, twisted and evil.
The implication here is that Vader is so lost that he has no hope of return.
Lost.
He's lost his sense of agency. That's the fascinating part about this whole thing. The Sith try to take reality and bend it to their will. In spite of this, they become slaves. Luke begs his father to come with him, but Vader retorts.
You don't know the power of the dark side. I must obey my master.
The Emperor says the same thing.
By now you must know your father can never be turned from the dark side.
Even though Vader sought power, he found himself bound to the will of his master. In a literal sense, it's the Emperor. In a metaphorical sense, it's his own drive towards evil. Luke is a bit of a radical thinker here in his insistence that Vader can be turned. He opposes the opinion of the Jedi and the Sith. He's asking an important spiritual question. Can a fallen soul be redeemed? It seems that he came across the answer by accident. His arm was cut off, and Vader cornered him. All may have seemed hopeless, but Vader didn't destroy him. The darkest hour was the spark that brought about the light. Luke took the bad and saw good. He realized there was still good in Vader. Although Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, they're treated as two different people. Originally, Obi-Wan uses this to hide Luke's parentage from him. He tells Luke that Darth Vader killed his father Anakin. This is essentially a metaphorical way of saying that Vader killed the good in himself. That is Luke's greatest moral victory. When he redeems his father's soul, it's not just a victory over evil or the Empire. Luke put his ideas to the test and came out on top. A philosophical debate played out in reality, and Luke made progress. By proving that a soul could be redeemed, Luke achieved victory.
You must realize you are doomed.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay, so now we move on to the prequels. The spirituality in the prequels is distinctly different. The myth is told. Star Wars was a 3-part story, and while George had some idea of what the story of the prequels would be like, ideas are not the story. The story only exists when you make it. The Enterprise has shifted somewhat from myth to tragedy. In this form of storytelling, we don't ask who the gods are, but rather, How do we contend with them? The spiritual lens will illuminate for us the fall of Anakin Skywalker in conjunction with the fall of the Jedi and fall of the Republic into fascism. Speaking of fascism, Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is among my least favorite people now. First off, I have really cool ideas for philosophy that I want to explore in this video. Then I realized that he had all of those ideas first. Then I find out that the book where he explored a lot of these ideas is very long and very dense. Do you know how much work this video has already taken? Then I find out that he joined the German political party that killed my grandfather's entire family during the 1940s. This is the worst guy. Like, I'm not joking here. He sucks. The idea I want to explore here is the way that technology cuts us off from the spiritual. Intuitively, you might push back on this. How could technology cut someone off from the spiritual? They're in separate categories. In theory, you're correct, but in practice, you're very stupid. I just called the stupid police and they're on their way to your house right now. Just think about it for a moment. When does the spiritual feel more real? Is it when you're living in a house, playing on your phone, doing the dishes? Or does it feel more real when you're in the mountains? It's not a question of whether you believe any of this. It doesn't seem like Heidegger did. We're talking about spiritual experience, connecting with something greater than yourself. Technology convinces us that we're the greatest things around because it distracts us from the raw existential complexity that is ever present in nature. There's actually a scene in the original trilogy that explores this idea very well. The Empire is very proud of their technology. An officer essentially speaks about the Empire as if it has become God.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Darth Vader, although we'll soon see his spiritual decay, is well aware of this folly.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Darth Vader gets it. The technology of the Death Star convinces the Empire that there's nothing greater than themselves. By its very nature, it cuts them off from the spiritual.
Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes.
The Imperial officer assumes that he's on the side of the future and enlightenment. Vader is an idiot under this officer's framework. All he has is belief. We have the technology.
Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
It didn't work.
He assumes that his control of the world through technology is a full understanding of it. He's distracted from this world's very real spirituality by technology. Darth Vader gives him a very potent reminder of it.
Hidden fort.
Martin Heidegger called this distraction caused by technology in framing. This is the process of reorganizing all the various elements of nature, trees, rocks, rivers, and animals, carving them up and placing them into so many artificial frames, all to be used up as resources. Think for a moment about your typical suburban neighborhood. Nothing in the neighborhood conforms to nature or reality as it is. There are streets, yards, property lines, and houses. None of these conform to nature. They're not inherent to metaphysical existence. Heidegger categorized things in their essential being to being either present at hand or ready to hand. When an object is present at hand, it's essentially functioning in its own state of being. For example, think of a rock. A rock is a rock. What's a rock used for? Well, it could be used for several things, but it doesn't specifically have a purpose. When you look at a rock, you don't think about its purpose. You experience the rock in and of itself. That is presence at hand. Experiencing the present as it is. Now think about a hammer. A hammer is not a hammer. A hammer has a use. You can't experience the hammer in and of itself. It's very... Okay, there we go. Its very existence suggests a purpose. Hammers don't occur in nature. In fact, their very being is in a way questionable. Is this a hammer? Or a formed piece of metal attached to a piece of wood? The purpose of the hammer distorts its being. This is ready to hand. As society progresses, we transition from a world that is present at hand into the ready to hand. The world becomes inframed or essentially dominated by the ready to hand. No longer do you experience anything in its essential present at hand state. Instead, you go whole days experiencing only that which is ready to hand. Everything you see in the world has a purpose. This cuts you off from the spiritual. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a spiritual decay in the prequels correlated with the technological growth in the form of the Clone Wars. In The Phantom Menace, the technological army is pitted against natural heroes. We have the Jedi who are in touch with the spiritual, an innocent people defending their land, and a group of creatures who live in swamps underwater. They're in a sense overcoming the enframing of their world. In Attack of the Clones, there's a sort of resignation to enframing. The clones, although somewhat human, are ultimately technological in their nature. In some sense, although humanity is viewed in the sense of the present at hand, the clones are in their very nature ready to hand. They were built with a purpose and used. They have no inherent presence at hand. They're tools genetically modified for war. At the end of Attack of the Clones, all of the clones line up and these gigantic ships fly overhead. The world has lost any semblance of presence at hand and entirely surrendered to enframing. We will also see this transformation with Anakin. Anakin will struggle to see each moment in the present at hand. He doesn't want to take in reality as it is. He is impatient to become a Jedi. His desire is to take control of the world. Now, Heidegger didn't explicitly frame this in terms of spiritual experience. He got his start in theology, but seemed to reject the explicitly spiritual later on. However, some have noted that his thoughts on being are, in a sense, despiritualized spirituality.
May I suggest that the big being has an uncomfortably strong homology to God? This search after being, which is enigmatic and discloses itself in some very peculiar ways, may well be the depersonalized form of God in the 20th century.
Despiritualized spirituality should sound very familiar to you at this point. In this way, Heidegger lines himself up with Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Joseph Campbell. I don't know if George was specifically inspired by Heidegger, but Star Wars has a sort of re-spiritualization of this despiritualized philosophy. The prequels introduce a different perspective to the Star Wars universe. Make no mistake, they're still packed with spiritual meaning, but they've taken a step down from being myths in and of themselves to exploring the world that these myths inhabit from the perspective of those who believe in the religion. The Jedi's propensity to share wisdom is manifested from one of the first exchanges in the film.
I have a bad feeling about this.
We of course start with the iconic line that appears in every film.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs.
This is essentially the thesis statement of the prequel films. This is the theme that we're going to explore in depth. Obi-Wan brings up a valid objection though.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
Okay, Qui-Gon, I see your present-mindedness, but I'll object that it's pretty dumb to ignore the future. We have our thesis and antithesis. Should we keep our mind on the present or be mindful of the future? The answer is synthesis.
Not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living force, young Padawan.
From the very beginning of these films, we receive an overview of their themes. We see the failure of the Jedi and the greed of Anakin Skywalker wrapped up in 3 sentences of dialogue. Let's skip to when we meet Anakin. The plan for Anakin's arc was based on a philosophical question. Where does evil come from? George Lucas was interested in answering this question with Anakin's story, and to find that out, we have to see Anakin in a state of innocence. This is the beginning of the story. Good that becomes corrupted. Anakin is a young slave child on the planet of Tatooine. While attempting to escort the Queen of Naboo to the Senate to inform them of an unlawful invasion of their planet, the Jedi and the Queen's ensemble have a ship malfunction and they're forced to land on a desolate planet. On the planet, they meet Anakin, who kindly helps them win the money they need to get the parts for their ship by winning a pod race. Qui-Gon notices that Anakin is special and that the only way he's able to win a pod race is with Jedi reflexes. He tests Anakin's blood and finds out that his midichlorian count, or genetic disposition toward using the Force, is incredibly high. He also finds out that Anakin was born of a virgin?
There was no father.
Excuse me? Why is Anakin Space Jesus? Why is Darth Vader Space Jesus? Who approved this? As a kid, I always thought Shmi was saying that Anakin's father left them, but it turns out he was Space Jesus? Okay, in reality, I think George Lucas was trying to invoke the common mythological trope of virgin births, rather than specifically the most obvious virgin birth in Western culture. Or maybe not, because Anakin is the chosen one. An ancient prophecy foretold of a coming Messiah that would bring balance to the Force Force, and Qui-Gon believes that Anakin is the chosen one. This means that Anakin must be brought to the Jedi to be trained as a Jedi Knight and fulfill his destiny. George is very intent to plant the seed of Anakin's greatest flaw here. In order to accept his destiny, he must leave his mother behind. Anakin plainly lays out his flaw here, and his mother rebukes it.
I don't want things to change.
But you can't stop the change, any more than you can stop the suns from setting.
Anakin's greatest weakness is his fear of change. At the intersection of his destiny, he walks forward into the unknown and then runs back into the arms of his mother. He rejects the call to adventure. His mother convinces him one more time to embrace his destiny.
Don't look back.
Here is the crux of the story. Anakin's refusal to accept change is spiritual deadness. Although this seems innocent at the time, his fear of change will have devastating consequences. Anakin has a strong ability to use the Force, but a weak connection to the spiritual. His destiny calls to him. He must engage with the present and go where he's called, and yet he still hangs on to the past. Instead of embracing that which is greater than him, being his own destiny, he hangs on to that which has diminished in the past. Anakin meets the Jedi, and they're rightly concerned. If you don't think about this scene in the larger context of the films, you may side with Anakin and hope that he can become a Jedi, but in reality, the Jedi are not concerned enough.
What you say? See through you. We can.
The Jedi call out Anakin for missing his mother. Anakin questions why this line of query is relevant. Yoda replies with the now famous line,
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
The Jedi are stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Their struggle to accept Anakin mirrors Anakin's refusal to accept destiny. If Anakin is truly the chosen one, then it would be right for them to abandon tradition and accept him. Yoda calls Anakin out for his fear, but what do the Jedi fear? Why does it seem like they're trying to avoid fate? Throughout the trilogy, we will explore the complicated relationship that the Jedi have with their own fate. At the end of the movie, Qui-Gon dies and Obi-Wan is promoted to the rank of Jedi Knight. In the process, he fulfills Qui-Gon's dying wish to train Anakin as his apprentice. Yoda sternly disagrees with this. Interestingly, Yoda fears Anakin being trained.
Grave danger I fear in his training. Fear is the path to the dark side.
In his last days, Qui-Gon completely submitted to his destiny. He was in tune with the present at every step of the way. He insisted on training Anakin because his first priority was his responsibility to that which is greater than him. He made his true master the will of the Force. Obi-Wan takes on that responsibility. He might not understand it as Qui-Gon did, but at the very least, he honors his master in death. Hesitantly, the Jedi Council allow Obi-Wan to train Anakin. They begrudgingly accept destiny. And that was Star Wars Episode 1. Let's go to Episode 2. I used to consider Attack of the Clones to be the worst Star Wars movie. In terms of acting, I still might say it's the worst one.
Here everything is soft and smooth.
The romance between Anakin and Padme is so important, and this movie fumbled the bag really hard on their chemistry. On the other hand, when you watch this movie through a philosophical lens, George Lucas was cooking. I'm not joking when I say the dialogue in this movie is endlessly analyzable. The first time we see Anakin and Obi-Wan, they're established as close friends, but they quickly devolve into bickering much of the time. Anakin's arrogance is the spiritual weakness that defines this movie. He thinks of himself more highly than he ought to. He feels himself to be as strong as any Jedi, even though he's only been a Jedi for a short time. It's clear that Anakin is in love with Padme, even though it's forbidden. Padme points out that it's forbidden for a Jedi to love, but Anakin rationalizes this away. He insists that since the Jedi have a mandate toward general compassion.
So you might say that we are encouraged to love.
Here's another way in which Anakin skirts into spiritual blindness. Although he pays lip service to believing what the Jedi say, he doesn't actually buy into it. He also tells Padme that he's a fascist on a date.
The trouble is that people don't always agree.
Well, then they should be made to.
I sure hope his politics don't cause any problems.
What you say? Oh, that you only meant well.
Throughout the film, Anakin more and more deeply falls in love with Padme. They both fall in love with each other and fight temptation to draw close to each other. Honestly, this storyline is a great idea, and it would be a romantically enthralling tragedy if it wasn't for the way that it is.
I don't like sand.
Anakin's unhealthy attachment to his mother comes to a head when he has a vision of her death. Anakin rushes to Tatooine to see his mother. He meets his newly adopted father and finds out that his mom was kidnapped by Tusken Raiders. Anakin Anakin finds the village where she was kidnapped and sees her in her dying breath. Then he does a genocide.
What you say?
At his mother's funeral, he decides to let everyone know that he's completely unstable.
I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom, but I promise I won't fail again.
Anakin is entirely unable to accept his circumstances. He resists change and by extension, the present moment. And this brings us to Anakin's ultimate spiritual weakness. He desires control, not of himself, but of others. He wishes to dominate the world and make it his own. To him, the Jedi's commands are whatever is convenient to him. Instead of being driven by morality, he shapes it into whatever mold he sees fit. To him, proper politics are whatever he thinks works. He shapes the good of the people into whatever mold he sees fit. Ultimately, his desire is to shape reality into whatever is convenient for him. He will do everything in his power to shape it into whatever mold he sees fit. Anakin clearly isn't in a good spot spiritually, but let's stop to examine the Jedi for a bit. It hasn't always been entirely clear whether the Jedi are wrong in these movies. I would say that there are 3 different perspectives on whether the Jedi are truly good. Many of our initial instincts might indicate to us that the Jedi are the arbiters of good, and therefore their actions are good in and of themselves. A simple reading of the prequel trilogy will take this approach. It makes some amount of sense. If the religion of the Jedi is true, then surely its most devout practitioners must be good by their very nature. It seems quite clear that their religion is true, so by extension, the Jedi must be good. You could also say that the Jedi were good because they did good things. Which is not really. This simplistic view leads to the counter reaction that notes that the Jedi's behavior is actually harmful. This is especially true of their forbidding of love. Anakin would have probably gotten a lot more support if he had only been allowed to marry Padme. Their forbiddance of emotion is incredibly unpopular, as it's at odds with much of Western culture. The Jedi Code, although not included in this movie, shows off this distinction. For reference, here's the Jedi Code. There is no emotion. There is peace. There is no ignorance. There's knowledge. There's no passion. There is serenity. There is no chaos. There is harmony. There is no death. There is the Force. In many ways, this seems like a denial of reality. There's a lot of connection to Eastern religion with these ideas, but the closest Western equivalent would probably be Stoicism. Stoicism rejects passion and emotion in favor of a peaceful life, doing whatever the next right thing is with no regard for feeling. It sounds brutal, but by letting go of your passion, you're also letting go of pain. It's an attempt to attain emotional invincibility. The only thing making you miserable is not your external environment, it's your reaction to your external environment that makes you miserable. Stoic philosophy in some ways has been helpful for me. When you run up against someone else's shamelessness, ask yourself this: is a world without shamelessness possible? No. Then don't ask the impossible. I think that Marcus Aurelius must have peered into the future and seen YouTube comments before writing this. I also happen to know a guy who works in door-to-door sales, and apparently it's very popular with them. It makes sense. If you have to face rejection every day, then Stoic philosophy almost becomes necessary. Is Stoicism an enforceable morality though? Should we put expectations on others to embrace Stoicism? It seems like a harsh world, especially if we enforce consequences for it. It becomes totalitarian and brutal. In some sense, it would moralize our very humanity away from us. For Anakin to be forced into this worldview when he's a child, in some sense is horrid. I don't know if George's intention was specifically to make this a mistake by the Jedi, but I think it's quite clear that he's overall critical of the Jedi. Anakin's spiritual downfall is paralleled by their own. The Jedi were flawed and made some pretty critical mistakes, and you could argue that this was intentional on the part of the creator. Obi-Wan's entire subplot leads to the ultimate condemnation of the Jedi. Obi-Wan goes to search for the bounty hunter that was trying to assassinate Padme. He goes to Kamino, and before he finds the bounty hunter, he's told that the Jedi had ordered a clone army. The guy who ordered it died 10 years before, and no living Jedi knew anything about this. It's very suspicious. So Obi-Wan does some more investigation, and he finds out that the Senate is being controlled by a Sith Lord.
What if I told you that the Republic was now under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith?
He doesn't believe it, but things are seriously getting sketchy here, and he's not really catching on.
No, that's not possible.
Before the beginning of the big action sequence, Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan are all set to be killed in an arena. The Jedi come to rescue them, but they're run down by the battle droids. Of the many Jedi who came, only a few are left, and they will soon be exterminated. Luckily, the clones show up. Yoda brings them into battle to create a perimeter. Is this really a good thing, though? It's certainly understandable. The Jedi would have lost their best people that day if the clones had not arrived. It wasn't really the decision of the Jedi either. This was Palpatine's decision. The moment he was elected Supreme Chancellor, he deployed the clone army that he allegedly had just found out about. And yet, this still feels like a spiritual compromise by the Jedi. At the beginning of the movie, Mace Windu makes an ironic statement about the Jedi.
We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
However, it seems that the Jedi steadily moved toward the role of soldiers. So although the usage of the clones was not the direct decision of the Jedi, their previous moral failures lead to this moment of compromise. They fight in a battle and come out victorious. At least, that's what it would seem.
I have to admit that without the clones, it would not have been a victory.
Sure, we might have made some compromises, but at the end of the day, haven't we won the battle? Shouldn't we celebrate that? No. You fool. You've signed your own death warrant. You're so far down the compromise rabbit hole that the Matrix's use of the analogy would seem subtle.
Victory, you say? Not victory. The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun the Clone War. Has.
By making moral compromises, the Jedi find themselves in a compromised position. The so-called keepers of the peace will soon become generals, soldiers in a great and terrible war. The movie closes out with the deployment of the clone army not so far from the Jedi Temple. They stand as this technological terror. Something feels uneasy about this grand army from the supposedly good guys. In the background, the Empire theme plays. The Republic isn't falling into fascism. It's already fallen into it. It's just waiting for the veneer to drop. Their world is becoming dominated by technology, and framing has become this world's mode of operation. Anakin is shown to have an affinity for technology specifically as a distraction.
Life seems so much simpler when you're fixing things.
His mother has just died, and this fixing is a small way for him to take control. The metaphor for fixing expands to his current situation.
Why couldn't I save her? I know I could have.
Anakin sees the world through the lens of technology. He can fix just about anything, so why shouldn't he be able to fix this very large problem looming over his life right now? Padme tries to take his mindset away from this view that tries to make the world ready to hand.
Sometimes there are things no one can fix.
That's reality. You have to accept your circumstances. This is spiritual awareness. It's not always pleasant, but if that's the state of being that you're in, resisting it will only make it worse. It will make you worse. He demands to become all-powerful.
You're not all-powerful.
Well, I should be.
Anakin is demanding that the world become more machine in a sense. Instead, it will be him that becomes more machine. Anakin's arrogance leads to him ultimately getting his arm cut off in a lightsaber duel. His hand is replaced with a mechanical hand. In his essay on Heidegger and Star Wars, Gerald J. Abrams points out that Anakin literally has a hand that's ready to hand and a hand that's present at hand. Now, before we talk about episode 3, we need to talk about Oedipal complex, Sigmund Freud's famous theory that every boy secretly wants to sleep with his mother. If you know anything about Freud's methodology, this is a really funny theory. Everyone, I've come up with a new theory. Every boy wants to sleep with his mother. What? How did you come up with that? I thought really hard about how my brain works. I don't know how close that is to reality, but I don't care to find out. Anyway, this theory was very influential. It definitely had an influence on the prequels. I mean, holy smokes, how have I watched literally hours of analysis for these movies and never, not once, has anyone mentioned it? If you don't know what I'm talking about, let's start with episode 1. With Freud's Oedipal complex, it prevents the men from seeking an appropriate relationship with a woman. And in The Phantom Menace, this exchange takes place.
Many things will change when we reach the capital, but my caring for you will remain.
I care for you too. Only I
miss your mother.
George, you are not sneaky. I see what you're up to, you freak. Anyway, so there I was watching episode 2, thinking about how George was definitely using Oedipal themes in these movies. I thought to myself, how far is he willing to go with this? Anakin doesn't have a father, so how could he want to kill his father? Is Obi-Wan his father in this scenario? And literally, as I was thinking about these questions, this exchange takes place.
Why do I get the feeling you're going to be the death of me? Don't say that, Master. You're the closest thing I have to a father.
You're the closest thing I have to a father.
I'm gonna kill you.
Are you serious? How have I heard nobody talking about this? George Lucas retroactively made Obi-Wan's death Freudian. I am dumbfounded. Sigmund Freud's theory of Oedipal complex has forever shaped our perception of the old Greek tragedy. In the play, the main character Oedipus is prophesied at birth to kill his father and marry his mother. His parents very rationally do not want this to happen. They decide the best course of action is to never see him again. Inadvertently, though, this fulfills the prophecy. When Oedipus grows up, he meets his father at a crossroads, gets in an argument with him, and kills him. Then he marries the recently widowed queen, who's his mother. Freud used this story to demonstrate a subconscious pattern he saw that all men subconsciously desire to kill their father and sleep with their mother. The name of Oedipus has become synonymous with Freud's theory, but the actual point of the play is different. The point of the play is that we can't avoid fate. If we should attempt to avoid it, we'll find ourselves in its grasp. If we're referring to the overall story of Star Wars Episode 3, it's very Oedipal. And now this will give us the groundwork for the spiritual weakness of Anakin and the Jedi as a whole. Revenge of the Sith takes the setup for downfall from Attack of the Clones and fulfills it. Some critics point out that Anakin's downfall feels anticlimactic. If you aren't watching carefully, it kind of seems like Anakin got turned down from a promotion and then went ballistic. That criticism ignores the manipulation that Anakin received from Palpatine in a big way. In the beginning of the film, Anakin defeats Count Dooku in a duel in front of Palpatine. Dooku is unarmed, and Palpatine prods Anakin to kill him. This is the beginning of several spiritual compromises that Anakin will make throughout the movie. Palpatine's first move here is to force Anakin to break his moral code in a fairly traumatic way. But this is an opportunity for Palpatine to draw Anakin closer to himself. While Anakin experiences this pain caused by Palpatine's prodding, Palpatine presents himself as the comforter for Anakin's emotional pain.
It is only natural. He cut off your arm, and you wanted revenge.
Can you say codependency? So anyway, it turns out that Padme is pregnant. Anakin is going to be a father, but oh no! Oh no! He starts having dreams that she's going to die in childbirth. If only there were a solution. If only Anakin were powerful enough to save her. There's gotta be a way to fix this.
Gotta figure out how to make money on this.
Anakin insists on taking control.
I won't let these visions come true, Master Yoda.
Anakin once again has an inflamed mindset. Yoda tries to get him to understand that he needs to live in the present.
Death is a natural part of life. Rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force.
Anakin is aware of the fate of Padme, but he seeks to overturn fate itself.
Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed, that is.
It's Anakin's greed that sets up his spiritual downfall. It's understandable to want to save your loved ones, but you must understand your place in the universe. You can't control fate. You must focus on what's in your power and do the right thing in the moment. Palpatine allows Anakin to indulge in his greed. He constantly puffs up Anakin's ego. He appoints Anakin to be his personal representative on the Jedi Council, and later insists that Anakin should be the one to take on General Grievous. In both cases, the Jedi take Anakin down a peg. While he's allowed on the Council, he's denied the rank of Master. The Council mistrusts Palpatine and decides Obi-Wan should fight Grievous instead. These seem like petty grievances from a rational perspective, but the basic facts of the matter obscure the weight of what's happening. Palpatine is creating a dynamic that everyone is falling into. He's establishing himself as safe. He's someone who can be trusted and profoundly trusts Anakin. These things alone would not have brought Anakin to the dark side, but emotionally they create a rift between Anakin and the Jedi. Palpatine is able to further this rift by the very nature of who he is. The Jedi begin to suspect that he's a Sith Lord and send Anakin to spy on him. This is true, and the Jedi are right to be concerned. For Anakin, who trusts Palpatine, this is a violation of trust. He sees the action of the Jedi as blatantly unethical, and who's there to comfort him? Palpatine. The man can't stop winning in this situation. Palpatine shrewdly recognizes that Anakin fears to lose Padme. Anakin has been desperately looking for a way to control his circumstances. He's looking for some way to avoid fate. Palpatine summons Anakin to meet with him and tells him the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise.
It's not a story the Jedi would tell you.
It's a Sith legend. Plagueis could save the people he loved from dying. If you've been paying any attention, you know why this is appealing to Anakin. Right here is the sales pitch. The dark side gives you the power you're seeking.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
The great irony here is that if you pay attention to the full arc of the story, the moral is not that the dark side can save the ones you love. The moral comes at the end of the story. Plagueis' apprentice kills him in his sleep.
Ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself.
Darth Plagueis had all the power in the world, but he couldn't save himself. This is not a desirable outcome. Palpatine just openly waved his red flags around, but Anakin has his rose-colored goggles on tight. This is his first question after the story.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Are you kidding me?
Are you out of your mind?
You hear a story about a man who gains incredible power but succumbs to the power of fate, and your first instinct is to ask whether it's possible to follow in his footsteps? Anakin wants control so badly that he's completely unaware of his own limitations. It's subtle, but right here, Anakin decides that he's going to pursue the dark side. Shortly after, he tells Padme that he's found a way to save her. This basically means that he's committed to joining the dark side. Finally, Palpatine reveals his hand.
It's too late. Now I can unleash the true power of my fungus blast. Die! Die!
He's the Sith Lord. Normally, this would be a risky play, but Anakin has made a decision. Now, one does not reject their worldview in a mere instant. He still has some instinct toward agreeing with the people who raised him. Here is Palpatine's ultimate gambit, though. The conflict you've been feeling, it's not because wanting power is wrong. It's because you've been lied to. The Jedi want power just as much as you.
They know your power will be too strong to control.
They're hypocrites. You can either continue to believe their lies or accept that this greed is universal. I've been here for you. I believe in you. They don't. Are you going to believe the one who's honest about his greed? Or are you going to side with the liars who are just as afraid to lose their power? I can save Padme. Anakin reports on this to the Jedi, and they send a team to defeat Palpatine. Mace Windu doesn't trust Anakin once again and leaves him behind. Anakin sits on it for a bit and then says, "Screw that, I gotta know what's going on." When he arrives, Palpatine is cornered by Mace. The lawful thing to do would be to bring Palpatine before the Senate. He controls the whole thing though, so Mace can't do that. In a similar situation, Anakin stood before Count Dooku and killed him while he was unarmed. Anakin knew that wasn't the Jedi way. Right here, right now, Mace Windu was the representative of the Jedi. He was supposed to represent the righteous path. Anakin must have spent so much time feeling guilty for what he had done. In the same situation, it turned out that Mace was no more righteous. The Jedi are all hypocrites. Palpatine was right. They were no better than Anakin. They're all just seeking their own power. Mace can't help Anakin save Padme, but Palpatine can. Anakin decides to stop Mace and cut off his arm. This opens Palpatine up to finish him off. This is the final moment where Anakin can't turn back. He's been under the tutelage of the Jedi. He knows that once you go down the dark path, it will dominate your destiny forever. He's resigned himself to his fate in seeking to overturn it. He's immediately capable of slaughtering the Jedi because he's been taught that there's a strict binary with no turning back once you join the dark side. At the very least though, Padme will be saved. Anakin can overturn fate. He'll have the power to save anyone from dying. Ultimately, actions have consequences though. Padme finds out what Anakin has done. It immediately tears a rift between them. Obi-Wan confronts Anakin and they get into a fight. Anakin loses and is left to die. Padme gives birth to the children and then dies of heartbreak. Here is the great irony. Anakin's attempts to save Padme were the very thing that killed her. It's much like the story of Oedipus. If you try to control your fate, you will find that your actions have only prompted your fate. Anakin's search for power has left him severely deformed. He must be put on an extensive apparatus to survive. As Anakin has sought control, desiring to treat the world like technology, he soon finds that he has become the technology in need of fixing. He's become inframed in and of himself. This gives us a lens through which to reanalyze the original trilogy. Before we do that though, I want to point something out. The transition between the prequel trilogy and original trilogy creates a sort of spiritual nature of its own. When we leave the world of the prequel trilogy into the original trilogy, it almost feels as if the enframing that had built up until episode 3 dissipates over time. In the prequel trilogy, many of the scenes were pure CGI. By heading from a time of heavy CGI usage into a time where it wasn't invented yet, it almost feels like a purification. It re-spiritualizes is the story. Thematically, this time is inherently spiritual as well. Yes, it's a time of darkness, but there's hope coming over the horizon. Episode 4 was renamed to be called A New Hope. The darkness will fall, the light will rise. In fact, it almost feels like a time of waiting for a Messiah. As an interesting little tidbit, if you're familiar with the Star Wars timeline, you know that the year 0 is set by the Battle of Yavin, or the end of Episode 4. In the same way that our world's calendar resets at the coming of a religious Messiah, the Star Wars calendar resets at a major point of religious revivification. And all sorts of Star Wars spin-off media that takes place within the time between the prequels and the original trilogy, you can feel this hope building up. The Force Unleashed, Jedi Fallen Order, Rebels, Solo, Andor, and Rogue One all create this sense that the times are dark now, but there's a time of light that's on its way. Rebels even recontextualizes Luke as the Chosen One. At the time of his death, Darth Maul asks,
"Is he the Chosen One?"
He is.
Even for someone with as sordid a path as Darth Maul, he sees a coming hope in Luke Skywalker. Now let's look at the original trilogy to see this arc of enframing to its conclusion. The iconic twin sun scene is in part powerful because it's pure presence at hand. Luke is fully engulfed in the moment, and we're right there with him. The swell of music emphasizes the power of this moment. Luke is connecting with something greater than himself, beholding the power of not one, but 2 suns. As he looks beyond the horizon, he anticipates his destiny. When Luke destroys the Death Star, at Obi-Wan's prompting, he turns off his targeting computer and uses the Force. He rejects the ready to hand and embraces the present at hand. As we talked about in the last video, it's a rejection of the technological in favor of the spiritual. When Luke meets Yoda, he only sees him for how he's useful. Yoda calls him out for constantly seeing the world as ready to hand. He only sees things for how they could be useful to him. He treats Yoda as a means to an end. Yoda calls him out.
This one, a long time have I watched. All his life as he looked away to the future, to the horizon.
This scene recontextualizes the twin sunsets. Luke wasn't looking forward to embrace his destiny, he was rejecting fate. Spiritually, it was the same problem as his father. He didn't accept his circumstances. He wasn't looking at the suns to accept them as they were. He looked at the suns in hopes of moving beyond them.
Never his mind on where he was, what he was doing.
Yoda is commanding Luke to embrace the present at hand. Don't see the world as some sort of utility. Embrace it for what it is. Otherwise, you could go down the path of your father. Obi-Wan describes Vader in Episode 6.
He's more machine now than man, twisted and evil.
This emphasizes how far gone Darth Vader is. He's so inframed that he can't be redeemed. This is, as discussed earlier, proven wrong, but at the end of his life, Vader has one request.
Help me take this mask off. Let me look on you with my own eyes.
In this scene, Vader is essentially demanding that Luke remove his inframed way of seeing the world. In his last moments, he can finally see the world and his son as they are. Finally, he embraces the present at hand.
The Force is dead.
Alright, we got direct analysis of George's movies out of the way. This video is called The Death of Spirituality in Star Wars, though, not the existence of spirituality in Star Wars. Or I could rename it. I probably won't, but I want to give myself the freedom to do that. The sequels are another step down in spirituality. Now, with that being said, the prequel trilogy is definitely a step down. It still kind of acts like a myth, but for the most part, it answers the question of what does the world of this myth look like? What got us here? The overwhelming sense of the spiritual is somewhat lacking overall, but the interest in spiritual philosophy is not, as I have shown. The concept of midichlorians obscures the spiritual and focuses on the naturalistic.
I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
It's heroin.
While George is certainly interested in mythologies themselves, he's also interested in their origins. Their histories and secularized explanations of them are just as important for him. Midichlorians for George are not a betrayal of the initial concept like some have posited, but rather an extension of his overall philosophy on religion. So the prequels de-emphasize the spiritual nature of Star Wars. Now that Disney has taken control of the property, the spiritual nature has further been de-emphasized. Now, I'm not a full-on Disney hater. There's plenty to criticize for sure, but at the same time, Life goes on. To say that I haven't enjoyed anything that's come out would be a lie. There was a time when I was all about it. Now I'm just living life. I'm very passionate about Star Wars as a whole and have a lot to say about it, but I'm not angry about the state of Star Wars. I do feel like it's lost a bit of its luster, though. So as we begin talking about Disney's Star Wars, I would like everyone watching to pause and pour yourself a glass of We're All Going to Be Okay juice. Thumbs up. If you don't drink the juice, you're not allowed to leave a comment on this video, or any video for that matter. It's not that I don't love you, it's just that I think you're perfectly capable of drinking the juice. This discussion does involve the quality of Disney's Star Wars, but it really isn't about that. It's about the death of spirituality, which does relate to quality, but it's not synonymous with it. Now, I will compliment Disney in one way. The Mandalorian actually finds a unique way to bring the myth back into Star Wars. That's because it invoked the style of a Western. George Lucas actually in some ways considered Westerns to be the cultural myths before Star Wars. It seemed to me that there was no longer a lot of mythology in our society, the kind of stories we tell ourselves and our children, which is the way our heritage is passed down. Westerns used to do that, but there weren't Westerns anymore. The Mandalorian did a great job. That's great. You also don't have to make Star Wars spiritual to make it good. Andor isn't very spiritual, but it is very good. So why bring this up as an issue then? The answer is that Andor also isn't trying to be quintessential Star Wars. It's doing its own thing and we're all the better for it. You know what is trying to be quintessential Star Wars? The Force Awakens. It's kind of ironic. The movie is called The Force Awakens, but in reality, this is the movie that kickstarted the death of spirituality in Star Wars. In some ways, The Force Awakens sought to remove the enframing of the prequels and return to an older era.
You know, they wanted to do a retro movie.
They specifically aimed for practical effects over CGI as a way to return to the old feeling of Star Wars. It's the same plot as A New Hope. In that sense, The Force Awakens imitates the monomyth.
The monomyth. The monomyth.
Herein lies the problem, though. The Force Awakens is trying to be Star Wars. A New Hope specifically. But Star Wars isn't trying to be Star Wars. Star Wars is big.
Big?
Yeah, we're big boys.
Big boy.
It's big because it invokes the history of mythology. If you invoke Star Wars without invoking the history of mythology, then you've imitated the form of Star Wars without the substance. The Force Awakens is a very watchable movie, and it successfully invokes nostalgia for the original trilogy. It matches the aesthetic and plot. Nostalgia is not spirituality, though. Sure, it can probably contribute to a spiritual experience, but it's not spirituality in and of itself. There are a few instances of spirituality worth noting. For one thing, Rey has a prophetic vision. As we saw in the prequels, prophetic visions can be very relevant spiritually. If you look at the function of this prophecy, it is in fact ready to hand. The prophecy is not in service of the story. It's in service of getting butts in the seats to the next movie. It's a mystery, but the mystery itself has no answer. What effect does this prophecy have now that all 3 sequel movies have come out? Not much. Prophecy is an idea that we've inherited from spiritual traditions. It's to The Force Awakens' advantage to use this idea. On the other hand, the way that this story was written kills the spirituality inherent to prophecy. The basic assumption of prophecy is that the force that enables it has some understanding of the future. However, for the writers of this movie, they had no idea what was coming. There was no overarching plan for the future. J.J. Abrams didn't know what would happen later. Imagine a world where God is only God for a short time and then is replaced by another God who does whatever he wants. What bearing would prophecy have if the first God didn't know what the second would do? This is not a prophecy. This is an advertisement dressed up as prophecy. It's a promise that great things are coming without the knowledge of the great things that are coming. This is not spiritual. Very far from it. What philosophical implications does this vision have? In what way is Rey connected to a higher power here? After Rey wakes up from the vision, she's frightened and looks up at Maz Kanata. The vision shakes her and makes her feel as though she doesn't belong there. Maz points to the legacy of the lightsaber.
That lightsaber was Luke's and his father's before him, and now it calls to you.
Legacy is a spiritual concept. In many ways, that's what spiritual tradition is. The ideas and symbols handed down from generation to generation. There's power in these symbols. The symbols of Star Wars have become iconic. The Force Awakens is keenly aware of this and seeks to invoke these symbols as much as it can. What do these symbols mean, though? It seems to me that The Force Awakens is deeply interested in these symbols for their own sake without exploring their purpose or power. The Millennium Falcon, X-Wings, TIE Fighters, and Anakin's lightsaber are burned into our collective collective cultural memory. Can you think of anything The Force Awakens has to say about these things? I can't. It seems more interested in showing them than thinking about them. It's not spiritual, it's nostalgic. There's nothing wrong with something being nostalgic, but it's not the spirituality that Star Wars was built on.
The belonging you seek is not behind you, it is ahead.
And would you look at that? One nugget of spiritual wisdom, a precious moment. And yet, I don't know if this is driven by philosophical interest. On the one hand, it seems to match the original trilogy's theme of pursuing your destiny. On the other hand, the substance is a little mischaracterized. It doesn't seem interested in the present at hand. A present at hand way of saying this is to pursue your destiny. This is subtly ready to hand, though. You're pursuing the future so that you can use it, not to fulfill your destiny. These movies are very much meta-commentaries on themselves, and the commentary here seems to be something akin to go watch the next movies.
I am no Jedi, but I know the Force.
To the credit of The Force Awakens, I think this gives it a big disadvantage in the spirituality department. There are no experienced Jedi in the film. The Jedi are the ones who dispense spiritual wisdom. However, if they wanted to have a Jedi in this movie, they could have put a Jedi in this movie. It's very possible, very easy to imagine. I'm doing it right now. I'm imagining Star Wars Episode 7 with Jedi right now. It's very spiritual. Maz continues sharing the spiritual wisdom that she has.
It moves through and surrounds every living thing.
The liturgy is back. Liturgy is spiritual. The purpose of liturgy is to remind you of what your core beliefs are, to bring you back to the essentials of your beliefs. That's fine. That's good. It's spiritual. But by its very nature, it's not saying anything interesting or new. If you wanted to experience this idea, then you should watch The Empire Strikes Back. Yoda does a much better job giving life to this concept. To see this repeated only reinforces what we already know. It's the basic fact of the Force. On its own, it's fine to bring back up, especially in the context of a soft reboot, but this is one of the most spiritually substantive things in the whole movie. This scene, it says nothing new. This isn't carrying on the legacy. It's reminding you of the legacy of something else. I used to defend The Force Awakens by saying that I'm fine with it being a soft reboot because so much Star Wars content is coming down the pipeline. It's fine if they want to reintroduce us to the world this way. It's been 9 years though, and this movie spends so much time invoking A New Hope. Why not just watch A New Hope? It's just as watchable today as when it came out in theaters.
Close your eyes, feel it, the light. It's always been there. It will guide you.
So I can analyze this. There is some principle to be taken away. It overall still feels hollow though. No amount of analysis will make this movie spiritual enough. I've basically shown all of the spiritual ideas this movie wants to explore. That's it. We're receiving hand-me-downs. It's somewhat understandable. They probably didn't want to rock the boat. Considering the reaction that rocking the boat got, it's probably even smart. The problem is that the essence of Star Wars was lost. If you're not willing to wade into spiritual philosophy, then you're not making capital S Star Wars. You've got lowercase s. Look how stupid it looks with lowercase s. Now, if you analyze this movie through a spiritual framework, I don't think you'll come up entirely empty-handed. There are certain plot elements that lend themselves to spiritual analysis. I don't think that there was much intentionality with the spiritual ideas in this movie, though. Certainly not on the level that George Lucas was on. I mean, sure, you have Kylo Ren struggling with the call of the light, but what does that even mean? Plot-wise, it's sort of a fun twist on the formula. It's substantially meaningless and philosophically empty, though. Is this a real phenomenon? Have you ever heard someone complain that they're struggling with the temptation to do good? If you've ever tried to improve yourself in any way, then you understand the general idea of what it means to be pulled to the dark side. Do you think that Joseph Stalin struggled with the temptation to be good? Do you think he struggled with that in a similar way to the way we struggle with addiction? Rey's journey has some sort of spiritual element, stepping into a large world. In many ways, this was already done through Luke's journey, though. Luke was given philosophy to underpin his learnings. Rey was given a Pinterest post's worth of information. In the final lightsaber duel, Kylo mentions the Force and Rey is like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I could show you the ways of the Force!
Oh yeah, I just forgot about the source of my power. This isn't carrying on the legacy of Star Wars. You know what does carry on the legacy of Star Wars, though? The Last Jedi. That's right, haters, I said it. Okay, maybe we'll need another glass of juice real quick.
Juice.
A lot of people assumed from the last time I talked about The Last Jedi that I still feel positively about it. I really enjoyed it when it first came out. Now though, it reminds me of Twitter. That's probably the worst thing a movie can do. You think I'm joking, but I'm actually dead serious. I can't enjoy this movie anymore because it reminds me of Twitter. I'm also being serious when I say that The Last Jedi is the Star Wars of the modern age. That's not a defense of the movie. In some ways, I think the controversy makes it the Star Wars of the modern age. Ultimately though, what makes this movie the Star Wars of the modern age is one concept: spiritual deconstruction. Spiritual deconstruction is a trend to talk about these days. Technically, it's probably about as old as spirituality itself, but that term is a trendy way to talk about it.
Hey guys, today I thought I'd try a new trend called spiritual deconstruction. I thought it'd be fun.
Everything I believe is wrong. Essentially, spiritual deconstruction is an examination of previously held religious beliefs and taking apart those that you either deem to be problematic or untrue in some other sense. This can either lead to an outright rejection of your overall religious belief or a new understanding that better incorporates the whole spectrum of your beliefs. Often, but not always, this is specifically related to Christian evangelicalism. Can you guess which director of a Star Wars movie grew up in youth group culture? Can you guess which director of a Star Wars sequel used to be an evangelical Christian and deconstructed his beliefs? Can you guess which director of Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, grew up in an evangelical youth group culture and now doesn't strictly believe that, but does hold on to some of what he believes to be the good of Christianity? Can you guess which Rian Johnson did a Star Wars about deconstruction? Can you guess which— Deconstruction is the story of The Last Jedi, and that means that it has a lot of spiritual philosophy to explore. Hooray! So, you know how The Force Awakens was very concerned with the symbols of Star Wars? So is The Last Jedi. It's a deconstruction of those symbols. You don't get much more explicit than Luke Skywalker throwing the iconic lightsaber over his shoulder. The central figure of the original myth shows disdain for its most recognizable symbol. Luke, as the original mythological figure, has in fact deconstructed his own myth. He wants to do that for Rey too. As Rey attempts to convince him to help the Resistance, he shows her the inglorious life he lives. He actively shows her his degraded lifestyle in order to force her to confront her preconceived notion of who he is. Ultimately, this comes from a place of hurt. It was Luke's actions that brought Kylo Ren to the dark side. He sensed the dark side in Kylo Ren and turned on his lightsaber in a moment of instinct. He regretted his actions immediately, but Ben felt betrayed. He turned on Luke and destroyed the new Jedi Order. Luke thought of himself in mythological terms. He saw himself through the lens of a savior.
Because I was Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master, a legend.
That's a psychologically unhealthy place to be. By its very nature, it engenders hubris. In one moment, he was shown his own weakness. I'm not trying to defend this movie here. If you hate it, by all means, please continue. If you hate this scene specifically though, then I feel like you're falling for the same trap as Luke did. If you've ever tried to overcome addiction, you know that it doesn't just go away. Winning one battle doesn't guarantee any future victories. We don't act rationally all the time. We can know what's true. We can know what will and won't cause damage, and we can still choose the path that hurts the people around us. Luke didn't even make an active decision here. It was a moment of instinct that left as quickly as it came. You can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle though. In one sense, Luke almost would have been right to kill Ben. He ended up becoming the leader of the space fascist child slavers. Some might even argue that Luke had a moral responsibility to kill Kylo.
We have a time machine. Why don't we just take it back to when he was a kid and then kill him?
Not to mention, Kylo killed the Jedi at the temple immediately. I don't know about you, but even if my mentor held a gun to my head, I still would not kill all of his other disciples. Weird, I know. However, this was a failure under the previously established moral system of Star Wars. Luke should have considered the redemption of Vader before he let instinct take over. That's the thing though. We constantly fail to live up to our expectations. In some sense, we all need to deconstruct the narratives that we tell ourselves. There seems to be something inside of all of us that tells us that once we learn a lesson, we never need to struggle again. It makes for a great story. We all live happily ever after. It's a myth though. It's not reality. We aren't always heroes. Luke teaches Rey 2 lessons about the Force, although he claims he's going to teach 3. Although Luke has cut himself off from the Force, he still holds on to the Jedi religion in some sense. His first act is to help Rey deconstruct her popular level understanding of the Jedi religion. Rey says that the Force is a power that the Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float. To a certain extent, this echoes what Obi-Wan said.
The Force is what gives gives a Jedi his power.
This is different though. Rey doesn't see the Force as what gives a Jedi their power. It's a power they have. Rey doesn't see it as a connection to a higher power. She sees it as a way to gain power. It's almost a Sith way of thinking. Luke is of course quick to attack this point of view.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Luke almost restates the liturgy here, but the restatement expounds on the concept in a way that shows understanding.
It's the energy between all things, a tension, a balance that binds the universe together.
In order to demonstrate what the Force is, Luke doesn't just tell her, he shows her. It's a really striking sequence. It's a unique scene in terms of what we've seen in Star Wars, but it communicates that sense of power that the Force has. After showing Rey the Force, though, he shows how he's deconstructed.
That Force does not belong to the Jedi.
It's an interesting proposal. You can see where Luke is coming from, though. There's a certain extent to which the Jedi religion seems vain. This all-powerful Force is something they have exclusive control over. Anyone who sees it differently is automatically an enemy.
To say that if the Jedi die, the light dies is vanity.
I think this statement is true on its face. Just think about it. Necessarily, what came first? The Jedi or the Force? The Jedi need the Force. The Force does not need the Jedi. For the Jedi to claim themselves as the light side itself is vanity. You didn't create the light side of the Force, you merely discovered it.
Oh, you think the light is your ally? You merely adopted the light.
You call yourself a servant of it, and yet you decide what is good for it. Vanity. Lesson 2 deconstructs the deeds of the Jedi.
Now that they're extinct, the Jedi are romanticized, deified. If you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure.
This gets pretty controversial again. It draws back to one of the central questions of the prequels. Were the Jedi good? As a reminder of the three camps, 1. The Jedi were the arbiters of good and were therefore good. 2. The Jedi were good because they did good things. 3. The Jedi were kind of terrible. The Last Jedi opts for option 3.
3 is a magic number.
This isn't an uncommon opinion, but it is one of several possible interpretations. By committing to this option, you're gonna piss some people off. No! I think the text of the prequels subtly enforces this interpretation, but it's a hard pill to swallow. Not everyone goes for it. It's also highly narrativized. You could just as easily argue that the Jedi did the best they could with the information they had. So with that being said, in one sense, I really appreciate The Last Jedi's renewed interest in spiritual philosophy. I think in that way, it really pushed the series in the right direction, especially with the way it modernized the philosophy. Here's the problem though. If you're building a myth, then now might not be the time to deconstruct it. If you want to sell this story as a continuation of the previous story, then how much leverage do you have to deconstruct it? It's almost like building a bridge, and then as you get close to completing it, you start tearing it apart. Sometimes deconstruction is necessary. If you move from a bad place ideologically to a better place, then that's commendable. You should always be critically examining your own beliefs. At the same time, Star Wars is a good myth, a beautiful one. What end does deconstruction serve? The point is not to say that The Last Jedi is a good or bad movie. Quite frankly, that question no longer interests me. I think it further sinks the spiritual essence of the films, though. Yes, it explores interesting philosophy, but the ship is sinking. This movie furthers the death of spirituality in Star Wars regardless of whether it's good. And finally, that brings us to the rise of Skywalker. In this movie's defense, it does have one major spiritual idea. That would be Rey's connection to the Jedi of the past. The first time we see her in this movie, she's asking the Jedi to be with her.
Be with me.
Unfortunately, she struggles to make this connection.
They're not with me. Ugh.
This is a new take on spiritual experience that's both relevant and interesting. Spiritual experience can't happen on command. You can't simply wish to experience it and then it is so. It often takes time and commitment to a process. In some ways, struggling to connect with the spiritual is an important part of spiritual experience. So with that being said, what's the solution to this struggle? Rey finally hears the voice of the Jedi.
Force surrounds you, Rey.
Let it guide you as it guided us.
You know, that's fine, but as is, that's not a grand finale. You want to end Star Wars on a bang, and this is how you do it? The full extent of the spiritual philosophy of the grand myth of Star Wars is struggling to experience the spiritual, and then when the plot demands it, you finally experience it? Riveting. In so many ways, this movie is the antithesis of the spiritual. You could say The Rise of Skywalker is the most entertaining Star Wars movie. Being entertaining isn't a bad thing. Every Star Wars movie is entertaining in its own right. The Rise of Skywalker is entertaining before all else, though. It's more interested in keeping a fast pace than any particular event that happens within. The Rise of Skywalker is entirely unwilling to let any moment be sacred. The original trilogy was full of magic and wonder. The Rise of Skywalker has no sense of wonder at any point as far as I can see. When Neil Postman describes the relationship between television and religion, he puts it this way: the spectacle we find in true religions has as its purpose enchantment, not entertainment. The distinction is critical. By endowing things with magic, enchantment is the means through which we gain access to sacredness. Entertainment is the means through which we distance ourselves from it. The Be With Me scene is one of the most spiritual moments in the movie. It's over just as soon as it starts, though. She gives up right away, talks with Leia for 2 seconds, and then we get a fast-paced training sequence with crazy fast cuts and flashbacks, and Kylo Ren gets intercut between. Compare that to the sunset in A New Hope. We sit in that moment. Luke isn't doing anything. He's not hovering in the air with a bunch of rocks around him. He's experiencing that moment in its full power. A New Hope sits in the moment and lets emotion build up there. Rise of Skywalker can't even sit still for 5 seconds.
You can either eat it right now or you can wait.
Perhaps the fast pace is due in part to the fact that J.J. Abrams came in late and essentially only had 2 movies to make his version of the trilogy, with Rian Johnson's ideas sandwiched between his own. At the same time, though, this movie is a very inframed experience. I guarantee that it wouldn't be the way that it is if not for social media. For one thing, it's very much a reaction to The Last Jedi. It tries very hard to make up for the previous movie's failings. Before this movie came out, I heard people say, I don't know how they can bring the franchise back after that. Regardless of what you think about The Last Jedi, this isn't the way to do that. Every single one of its responses to The Last Jedi is ready to hand. The moment isn't there for its own sake. It serves the purpose of letting you know that we've heard your complaints and we're seeking to fix them.
We need to put some hold-on maneuvers. Do some real damage.
Come on, that movie is 1 in a million.
These scenes are reactions to social media. This movie is doing PR. The business of public relations is about as far from the spiritual as you can get. When Rey throws her lightsaber into a fire, Luke's ghost comes out and catches it and says,
"The Jedi's weapon deserves more respect."
This isn't a spiritual principle being laid out for the audience, as is customary for the quotations of the Jedi. This is a reaction to social media outrage. It's incompatible with spirituality. At the end of the film, Maz Kanata hands Chewbacca a medal. If you've ever engaged with Star Wars plot hole discussion, you're probably aware that in the ending ceremony of A New Hope, Han and Luke get medals. But in spite of Chewie's participation in the ceremony, he doesn't receive a medal. In spite of this minor mistake, the scene in question has a very spiritual nature. What could cap off the myth of the original Star Wars movie better than an actual ceremony? By their very nature, ceremonies take us out of the ordinary, everyday being of our lives into a sacred space. Calling back to this scene is an insult when you're trying to address the concerns of plot hole clickbait articles.
Are we honestly supposed to believe that Jango Fett willingly worked hand in hand with Sifo Dyas in the Galactic Senate?
Don't worry about fixing the original trilogy. It's doing fine. Fix your own movie. The Rise of Skywalker is utterly concerned with legacy. It's a natural direction to go into. If this is the last film of the saga, the instinct to make it feel like the culmination of the franchise is an understandable decision. One instance of this is that Palpatine returns somehow.
Somehow Palpatine returns.
And now he reveals that he's in some sense possessed by all the previous Sith. Apparently, by killing a Sith in anger, you take on the previous Sith's souls as well as the soul of the one you killed, or something. This feels fairly surface level and works for plot purposes, but in hindsight does strange things to the original trilogy. Ultimately, it is spiritual in some sense, but doesn't really seem to be interested in spiritual philosophy. I think this is a symptom of the overall spiritual disconnection of Star Wars, though. If Star Wars was told in a linear fashion, this would be a recoverable error. The lack of linear storytelling has consequences, though. The decay of spirituality in the sequel trilogy now trickles down into everything.
I thought I'd find answers here. I was wrong.
Look, a story doesn't have to be spiritual to be good. Different stories can take all sorts of perspectives on spirituality and be interesting and relevant to us as an audience. Even Star Wars doesn't have to be spiritual. Again, Andor was pretty good, but not very spiritual. Unless I missed something, that's possible. However, If you're trying to be something, then you have to transfer those core essences. If you're trying to be Star Wars, then spirituality is something that you can't skip on. It seems that they've recreated the body of Star Wars but left out the heart.
Something's missing.
What about the soul?
I love the sights and sounds of Star Wars. I can probably get by on those and have a decent time in a movie theater. There's tons of beautiful work in these movies done by creative and intelligent people, even in the sequels. There's a beauty missing from Star Wars that can only come from its original creator, though. George Lucas isn't a consistent man, but I think that's what makes him uniquely brilliant. An anthropologist turned filmmaker is going to make something that nobody else can produce. I wonder if there's anyone in Hollywood who could have recreated that expertise. I believe that there can still be good Star Wars, but we have to stop deluding ourselves into thinking that it can tap into that same power. Although I would celebrate anyone who genuinely tries. Ultimately, the sequel's failure to embrace the spirituality of George Lucas's Star Wars has put it in a rut to the point where it makes it really hard to recover. Where the time between the prequels and originals is inherently spiritual, the time between the originals and the sequels feels like a sinking ship. This is no longer messianic. It's depressing. The Ahsoka show was ultimately what made me realize this. It constantly looks back to things we learned in the original trilogy, but can't innovate on those ideas.
I can't see. How am I supposed to fight?
With the blast shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
Even when it tries, the message is ultimately lacking substance.
What's the lesson, Master?
Live or die.
Yeah, this video was originally supposed to be about Ahsoka. I got a little carried away. Oops. Ultimately though, I hope that you come away with a greater appreciation for George Lucas's work. It's incredible what he did. He's not a consistent filmmaker by any stretch of the imagination, but often the best ideas come from inconsistent people. Star Wars is beautiful, and the key to its success was the legacy of great stories that came before us. I bet some of you were wondering what my thoughts on The Acolyte are since it's coming out as I'm uploading this video. Life is full of disappointments.